Welcome everyone to this Leganto training session. Hi, I'm Kevin Lane Cummings, training services consultant with Ex Libris, now part of Clarivate. Also on the line is Jesse Ransom, who's a teaching and learning product specialist. And this is the fourth session in the Become an Expert in Leganto training series. And here's the list of all of the training sessions that we've had so far. If you missed any of these sessions, there are recordings and slides available for you to download and watch and listen. Today's session is optimizing the instructor experience. A little different than what we've been covering the last few weeks, because this is really about what's in front of your instructors and a little bit of what's in front of your students, the students who use Leganto. Next month, we're going to do purchasing workflows, and then we'll finish up in June with actionable analytics. I assume that you were able to register for today's session on our Knowledge Center website. Jesse, if you could just throw the link in the chat that goes to this link at the bottom, the Knowledge Center. This is the place to register for the upcoming sessions in May and in June, as well as look at the recordings of the previous sessions and download the slides like I'm showing you here. And it's actually worth downloading the slides, not even to more than just to take a look at the slides that I am showing you folks, but in addition, there's quite a few links to documentation and training videos and things like that that are a great way to make use of the slides. Today's sessions, this is our agenda that we'll be covering. We've done some research to find out what instructors really value about Leganto, and so I'm going to report on that research to you because it's going to clarify why we make certain recommendations through the rest of the session. Then we'll look at how you enable some recommended features, how to check the instructor workflow and make sure everything applies to your institution situation. Then we'll suggest a few options that we consider unnecessary or perhaps more complicated than most institutions should use, and you can remove those unnecessary options. And then some features that are not enabled by default, but we think are really relevant and useful for you folks. And then, as I say at the end, we'll have a list of documentation and video resources to help you learn more about all of this. Throughout the session, if you have questions, send them through the WebEx chat and just send them to all panelists so that both Jesse and I can see those questions. We're going to start by looking at what do instructors value about Leganto. So a few years ago, ProQuest conducted a survey of 13 different institutions around the world, specifically talking to instructors about course reading lists. And we didn't just talk to institutions that use Leganto. 3 of those 13 institutions did not use Leganto at the time. And these were not impersonal online surveys or something like that. Instead, we spent 45 minutes talking with each instructor, kind of a semi-structured interview. And I'm going to give you some of the comments we heard about that during those interviews in a few minutes, but I want to show you first what those instructors used. And here is the list of the variety of learning management systems and virtual learning environments at those different institutions, such as Blackboard Learn and Canvas and Moodle and so forth, as well as the variety of geography. A few in the US and the UK, but then we had a couple in Hong Kong and Australia and Norway. If you have not surveyed your own instructors to kind of find out how they use Leganto or whatever reading lists they have been using, I encourage you to do so. The Ex Libris campus engagement team can help you if you're not sure how to start that process, because they've been doing that quite a bit. They talk to lots of institutions and they can give you a variety of suggestions for the kind of questions to ask. And I'll give you a hint on how to get a hold of those folks if you don't know who your Ex Libris campus engagement team leader is. Many of you who have surveyed instructors have shared your survey results with us, and thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate that because we rely on you to share instructor feedback. We don't really work with those folks. You do. We work with you. So feel free to pass on those comments that you get from instructors about how to use Leganto and how to better use Leganto. So here are some of the things from that survey and from other conversations with the library staff who relay information from instructors. These are the kinds of things that instructors value about Leganto. And I find it that these It's interesting that these values are not necessarily the same as the reasons that library staff value Leganto. For example, instructors aren't really motivated by the fact that Leganto can provide usage information, but I'm sure you appreciate that part. But instructors like the fact that Leganto streamlines collaboration with the library, that reading lists are easy to reuse and share, that Leganto keeps those resources organized, and that Leganto connects the students to the library and provides easy access to the resources. It's a small list, and this isn't everything that instructors value about Leganto, but it's some of the key things. And these things are pretty simple and pretty high level, but that's a good way to think about Leganto, because we want Leganto to be pretty simple for instructors to use. And for the rest of the session, I'll be emphasizing ways to keep Leganto simple for your instructors. There is a lot of power in Leganto. It does have a lot of options and features, and you folks in the library can take advantage of a lot of that power. But I encourage you to keep it pretty simple for instructors and meet their values with this tool. So here are some of the things that the instructors told us about why they like Leganto and how it provides them value in their own words. Someone said, I simply put the title in and then the rest seems to take care of itself. That's pretty cool. I love this list. I love the way it looks. To me, it's inviting. It's almost like students are familiar with this kind of interface. And another instructor said, I'm teaching now for the second time after I redesigned it, and it took me about 15 minutes to set up the course. In other words, it was quick. Some other things instructors have told us is how Leganto is easy to use, or at least it can be easy to use, and they like to get in there and just start playing with it. Someone said, what helped me more than anything was just getting in there and doing it, understanding the concept. And another instructor said, I actually only went to a training session after almost 2 years of using this software because I find it intuitive. But that training actually taught me a bit more about what I could do and what good practices are. Certainly not everyone likes to try something without understanding how it works, but Leganto can be configured to be that easy to use. There are certainly different types of users, of Leganto users, amongst the groups of instructors, including instructors that use it frequently and others who don't. And one person said, I might decide the afternoon before a class to include something interesting and relevant. I'll ditch what I was going to do and go for the brand new one that just came out and is very current. Another instructor says, I update the reading list this time of year and then I forget about it for a year. And when I come back, I find that I've forgotten quite a bit and need to do some relearning. So keep in mind that instructors at your institution may not have the same experiences or expectations as each other, or definitely as librarians, as you folks, and it helps to hear how they think about it. And we consider that many instructors are new to the system every time they use it because they maybe only use it once a year or maybe twice a year, and then they forget what they did. By the way, looking ahead, instructors are hopefully going to like Leganto even more next year. In 2023, there will be a new user experience for instructors. It's being developed right now, and we'll release it sometime in a year from now. You may have already heard about this, and it's going to push even further this concept that instructors are new users every time they use the system because they just don't use it that often. So we're going to simplify the user experience and make it even more intuitive based on modern technology and modern understanding of a user interface. And we want to expose instructors to the right options at the right time, depending on what the task is, things like that. This is a mock-up of what it's probably going to look like or somewhat going to look like. This was revealed in February by the project manager for Leganto, Dolav Ben Artzi, and it will not come out until 2023, and so it's probably going to be changed along between now and then. This is just an early mock-up incorporating some of the ideas. But just to give you a sense of the kind of things that it's going to be looking like. If you missed the presentation that Dolav did about this new user experience, you can watch the recording and see the slides, and I have a link for that at the end of today's session. And again, this is coming next year, but during the presentation today, we'll be talking about what you can do with the current user interface, again, to make it even better for your colleagues, your instructors, and the students that they're working with. All right, that's what instructors value about Leganto. So I'm going to get into the first kind of group of features. These are recommended features. And I know that calling them recommended features may not apply to all of you or to every situation, but I'm going to start with them because they're really easy to turn on and off. And they're in this list because they can be useful to most institutions. Most institutions can at least consider all of these recommended features. And there's a tool in Leganto itself where you as a Leganto administrator can very easily enable and disable about a dozen of these recommended features. Not everyone on your library staff can see this little gear icon in the upper right corner of Leganto, but if you do have it, then you're one of the administrators of Leganto. And if you click on it, you'll see a list of recommended features pop up. By the way, you might have to click on this link that says show me more recommended features to see all the features. They'll come in like that. These are the features, like I say, there's like a dozen of them here that we at Ex Libris can fairly easily recommend to most Leganto institutions. They're useful. They fit into those values that the instructors have that we were just talking about. I'll tell you about several of them as we go through the rest of the training session, but I won't show all of them. If you need details about what a particular feature does, they each have links to documentation here, watching a short video or things like that to talk about it. Also, I'll be discussing a bunch of other features today that you can activate and deactivate that are not on this list. But if you just need something real quick to get started, after today's session, you can go into Leganto and just start looking at this list and start thinking about some of these things. Quick way if you don't have as much time and you don't need to read all kinds of complicated instructions on how to set something up. You just flip the switch, the little slider switch to enabled. By the way, if you have had Leganto for a while, you might want to take a look at this list again because we add features to it every once in a while. So check and see if there are some features that would help your instructors and students. And that's true for a lot of the features in Leganto. If your institution recently started using Leganto, then many of the features I talk about today will probably be configured into the recommended setting by default, and you won't have to change them. But for those of you who have had Leganto for a while, there may be some features where the default back when you started wasn't originally set the way we now recommend for the feature. So it'll be a good idea to take a look at those settings now and see if they want to change them. One way to find out what you can change, what settings you can make, what features you can turn on and off is just to step through what the instructor sees, their workflow, their standard workflow when they kind of get started. So I'm going to conduct a kind of a walkthrough in Leganto, and along the way, I'll show you some of the customizations and configurations that will help those instructors. Okay, I encourage you to do this as though you're an instructor. By that, I mean log into Leganto as an instructor, so that you see what they see and not what an administrator sees. Because as an instructor, you see a different set of tools than the admin folks do, and definitely different than the students see it. If that's not an option, if there's no way for you to actually log in as an instructor, can you log in with an instructor? Can you sit down with one of your instructors and have them log in and watch what they do? That's an interesting way to see how they use it for the first time, especially if they haven't used it before, or if they haven't used it in a long time, and it's as if they're using it for the first time. It'll give you a chance to see what things need to be done to make it more intuitive for them. And finally, if you do use a learning management system at your institution and you have Leganto kind of feed into that, I suggest you and the instructor start there, because that's probably where most instructors will start anyway, and it will show you the entire instructor workflow. And so I'm going to start that way myself in our imaginary learning management system. This is Canvas for this demonstration, but it doesn't matter what your institution uses. And you can see in the upper left corner, we're looking at a particular course. This is Philosophy 340, Human Ethics. And down the side are the various links to information about this course, like the announcements and assignments and grades and so on. So when instructors start in your LMS, what do they click to get into Leganto? Is it obvious to them? Here, we call it course materials. You could also call it reading list or resource list. Whatever works at your institution, probably don't want to call it Leganto because instructors and students probably won't know what that is. When the instructor clicks the course materials link, this is what is supposed to happen. Leganto opens up in a window here inside Canvas. So you should check some things. Does Leganto really open up? Does it take you to the correct course? Because they should be linked properly. And in this case, Philosophy 340 is the course that we're working on. So everything's working fine. That's a configuration thing, setup things that we're not going to be talking about today, but definitely is a good check to make sure things are working. You can also configure Leganto so that if the course doesn't already exist in Alma, Leganto can create it behind the scenes so the instructor doesn't hit a dead end and has to stop at this point. The next thing to check is whether this interface looks okay. Does it look like Leganto is integrated into the theme or the style of your LMS, or does Leganto seem like a completely separate interface? For example, look at the color scheme at the top of Leganto. Does it match the color scheme of your LMS or your institution or whatever? You can change the color of the header here. Be careful that you don't pick a color that is too light. Otherwise, these little icons on here will disappear. Is there enough room, vertical room, to work with Leganto? Different LMS systems embed Leganto in different ways. For example, maybe Leganto's screen gets cut off at the bottom. You may need to adjust the iframe height for the maximum screen space. Generally, we recommend the embedded view, as you see here, where Leganto is embedded in the LMS. Some learning management systems don't allow that, or it just doesn't work well. In that case, you can set up Leganto just to open a new tab in the browser when someone clicks on course materials. And in fact, the user can click on this link at the top, and Leganto will pop out into its own tab. For instance, maybe a student using the LMS and then accessing course materials, maybe they're fine with the window as it's this size, but the instructor needs a little more room. Excuse me. So it's nice to tell those instructors, remind them of that button up there that lets them pop it out into a new browser window, a new browser tab, so that they can have more room to manage their courses and their reading lists. The next thing you might want to customize are some of the options that display along this landing page in Leganto. For example, this part of the display comes up when there isn't already a reading list. It says, create a new reading list from scratch. You can also have a section that allows the instructor to upload a document containing an existing reading list. And that sends the file to the library, and then the library staff assemble the Leganto reading list. But if that's not something that your library does, then you probably don't want to have the option here, so that you should hide it from this Leganto landing page. The other thing you can have on this page is the option for the instructor to roll over a reading list. It's not on my screenshot here, but it is one of the options that's further down the page here for the instructor to click a button and it will roll over the reading list to a new term. But if you are doing the bulk rollover of reading lists, like we talked about a couple months ago, or if you in the library reset reading lists, then you probably don't want the instructors to roll over their own reading lists, and so you'd want to hide that option from this Leganto page. That saves space on the page. It saves instructors the hassle of trying to do things that don't work, or worse, they think that the rollover works, but in fact it doesn't do it because you're doing that behind the scenes. You can also customize any of the text on the screen to make sure it's clear for your instructors and uses language that you use with them. It's done on a configuration table, and it's called the Leganto configuration, and then you go to General, and within that, it's the labels. Each of those pieces of text is a distinct label, as you can see here on this page. When you change the text on the label configuration page over in Alma's configuration, it immediately changes in Leganto as soon as you save it. So you can go make the changes, then come back to Leganto here and refresh the page, and you'll see how it looks in the change. Because this is the welcome landing page and it's the first thing instructors see, this is an opportunity to align it with the way you're promoting Leganto. And remember that idea of keeping Leganto clean and simple, at least on this welcome page, without a lot of extra options that might intimidate an instructor who hasn't used Leganto in a year or maybe ever. Really focus on that high-level idea of making it easy for instructors to share resources and how easy it is to reuse a reading list. Now, there are lots of codes labels on this page, and it's sometimes hard to figure out which one is which because they use these not necessarily intuitive terms for each of these labels, but they just put out just a few weeks ago a new tool in Leganto to help you out. So if you're logged into Leganto as an administrator, and then you click the menu in the upper right corner, in this case, it's a screenshot from Jesse's login. Partway down the list, there is a tool called Show Translation Labels. And if you click that, then your Leganto will suddenly appear with codes spread throughout it instead of the text. This is a way you can see which label on that configuration page needs to be changed to say the different things. And this works on any of the pages in Leganto, so you can just turn that on and then flip through it and make the changes that you need. Really neat tool, and like I say, it just came out in the April release.
Kevin, I'm going to pause you here. There's a question in the chat about which users can view the gear, which has the recommended features that you showed a few slides ago. So this is administrators. So I believe it's the fulfillment administrator or the Leganto interface administrator roles that can see those options and then also have permission to enable things from there.
Thank you. There's also relatively new is some animated GIFs that portray that are little videos to explain how to do things for instructors to watch. For example, this is the first one, which is meant to portray that you can add resources from several different places, including the library, open web, your computer, and organize them into a resource list. This is an onboarding tool to help instructors get used to using Leganto. It's just to explain what you can expect from the system. It's not really to train instructors on how to use them. And it doesn't really make sense to do this training, to watch this before you've even logged in. Here's another one. If the instructor has started logged in and started using Leganto, they'll probably encounter questions as they work, but there's a place in the product for that. And this is the last animated GIF of the onboarding, which lets instructors know where to go for help, but they can access this information within the context of the work that they're doing. So it's just some helpful ways of built into the tool to give the quick information that the instructor might need in the moment. So now the instructor has gotten into Leganto, the next thing they'll see are the reading list templates. And they will see this page even if you don't have any templates. But in that case, they'll just see the default template, which creates a reading list with one section. We recommend that you do create reading list templates. These can save instructors a lot of time. You won't be able to develop all the different types of reading list templates that instructors might want, but a couple of good common templates like these weekly templates could really help them get started. For the weekly template, you're going to want to base that on whatever length your standard academic terms are. But it can take a lot of time for an instructor to create like 12 sections in a reading list for the 12 weeks of class. So a template will make it much faster for them to get started, and therefore they'd be more likely to do it. Another popular template you might want to add is like this, where instead of organized by weeks, they're organized by essential reading and recommended reading and further reading. Or maybe at your institution, the instructors call them core materials and additional readings or whatever. Whatever's common or necessary at your institution. And at the end of today's session, I'll give you a link to the documentation about how to create these reading list templates. That documentation also has some other ideas for types of templates you can create for your instructors. And if you want to, you can even use the analytics of Leganto to pull a report of the section names that instructors are using, which may give you ideas for building other templates at your institution. By the way, this is one of those areas, these templates, where if you make dozens of templates, your efforts might backfire. That instructors might give up because they can't figure out which template they want to use. So if you keep the list to, 4 or 5, maybe 6 templates at the most of the common ones that you're pretty sure folks are going to use, especially if folks are coming in for the first time, that can be very helpful without being overwhelming. Once the instructor picks a template, they get into Leganto. And if the template wasn't quite right and they need to add a new section, there is a configuration that determines what happens when they click that button, the new section button. Where is it going to put the new section, at the beginning of the list or at the end of the list? And there's a configuration for that. And by default, this setting is configured to add a new section at the end of the list of sections. But if you have had Leganto for a while, it's possible that this is set to add a new section at the beginning. And we recommend you change that so that the new section, when someone is working on it, the new section gets added at the end. Because we figure that if someone is building these sections themselves, they're going to start with week 1, and then they'll do week 2 and week 3, and they would have to move them around if they were added at the top of the list rather than the bottom of the list. Okay, that is a general walkthrough from the instructor's perspective, getting into Leganto, starting in the LMS, proceeding through the templates and onto the reading list and so forth. So my next set of recommendations are for options that we think are generally unnecessary and that you can remove from your Leganto service. This can be controversial because it may sound like I'm about to say that Leganto has too many features. No. The people who created and updated Leganto put a lot of thought into these features that are built into it. And we also work with institutions around the world to get more ideas of what to add to Leganto. Sometimes the features are added that make Leganto work really well for some institutions, but not for others. And for other institutions, those features just add complexity that are not necessary. So I don't take lightly what I'm about to tell you. I'll try to explain my recommendations very carefully and specifically so you can make your own decisions. All right, back to Leganto. This is our Leganto demo site example. And the first feature I want to point out is the list advisor, excuse me, in the upper right corner. Some of you are using this, some of you are not. It's a way to make recommendations to instructors on things that they can do to, let's say, strengthen, to make it better, their reading list. The instructor can see these recommendations by clicking on those words, make this list better. Some of the recommendations include things like adding tags to resources, or adding sections, or adding descriptions. The list advisor will recommend organizing the reading lists, things like that. Many of the recommendations are actually good recommendations. And the way it works is that as the instructor adds the various elements to the reading list, the score in the box, 61% right now, the score increases. If you've been using this tool for a while and your instructors know about it and like it, yeah, leave it. But otherwise, I suggest you turn it off. And that may sound like an odd statement because I just said some of the recommendations are good. But in the time since that list advisor was added to Leganto, there have been other changes in the interface that make it easier for instructors to figure out how to add those good things to their reading list. For instance, right there, you can see in the middle is the add tag. That should be, when someone is adding a new piece of material to a resource to this reading list, it's right there for them to add a tag. And for instructors that are new to Leganto, the list advisor can be confusing. What does it mean that it's 61%? I'm not done yet. I can't publish it until it's 100%. So again, we suggest disabling that for most institutions. The same thing with the tip of the day. It's usually not critical information. It can be more confusing than helpful, and it does take up visual space on the page. By the way, if you disable the list advisor, then the tip of the day will automatically be disabled also. But if you decide to keep that list advisor, you can separately turn off the tip of the day. The next features are the two options for library review and for publish. And I suspect many of you have already spent a lot of time thinking about what to do here. Here's a quote from the survey I was telling you about earlier. The person said, an instructor said, one thing I do forget to do all the time is send the list. So I last sent it in May. I actually should be sending it because I put a ton of different resources in since then. There are some configuration options that can really help with this process of publishing or sending to the library for the review, and instructors may be confused. Which one do I do? In which circumstance do I send it for library review? In which circumstances do I publish it? There's a page in the Leganto documentation in the best practices section that talks about this and gives the pros and cons. And I'll show you the link to that documentation a little later. But this is definitely a feature where a blanket recommendation won't work for everyone. But the one thing I can recommend is you should pick one of these two. You can configure Leganto so that when the instructor publishes the list, when they click publish, it actually sends the list to the library staff for review. And when the instructor adds resources to a list that previously went to the library for review, then the new resources will automatically go to the library for review. So if you hear feedback like this quote from the instructor here, the instructors are saying they forget to publish or they forget to submit for review, I would encourage you to configure Leganto so they only have one of those options. I think publish is usually the best option. And you can even change the button to say publish to students or something like that. But I suggest that because publish tends to be the most meaningful to instructors, because to them, that's what they want to do. Even if when they click publish, what actually happens is it goes to the library for review. It's a way of kind of pushing that concept to the instructors. They just know when they're done, they click publish and it goes. Of course, this doesn't apply if instructors at your institution are much more comfortable working with library review, in which case they might be looking for that library review button, and then you choose to be the one, or move on to the library review or something. You could name that button whatever you want, but at least consider this for your instructors. The last thing I want to take a look at of things you could change and remove options is the menu options. These are the menu options. The list menu at the top, partway down the page, is the section menu, and then the citation menu. If we open up these three menus, there are dozens of tools on each menu, and they may not all be necessary to you or really to your instructors. And it could really help your instructors if you could reduce these menus to only those items that are really going to be used at your institution. So again, you know your users, you know how you and they will use the system. So which features are especially helpful? Which ones do you promote? Really think critically about that. Leaving something on just in case someone wants it isn't necessarily helpful here because there are so many. If it turns out later that instructors really need a tool that you had turned off, they'll probably ask you about it. Or if you do some kind of user survey and find out that people keep trying to do something and they can't because it's not on here. So for most institutions, we suggest that you turn off these dozen or so particular menu items. I'll mention just a couple of them here on the list menu. Order citations in all sections. This gives the instructor the option to order citations alphabetically by title or by author. That's pretty rare that an instructor would want to do that. Usually they put them in order for a reason. They put them in sections for reasons. And if they do select this option and order them alphabetically or by author or by title and then realize what they just did, they can't go back. There's no undo. They have to manually resort it. On the other hand, if at your institution, you know instructors prefer to order citations alphabetically by author or something, well, then if they talk to you about that, then leave the tool on the menu. Farther down the page here, LTI Direct Access. There are other better options for how Leganto links up with your learning management system, so you don't need to use that one. The print option down here is very similar to the export option, so you don't necessarily have to have both. Just leave the export on there, and then from there, the instructor can choose how they're going to export it. Some of these tools are important to you, I understand, but I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things you can take a critical look at. In fact, I'm going to just point out right here, rollover list. This is a place for the rollover list. You would remove it if rolling over lists are things that the library staff does instead of the instructors. These features that I was just looking at, the lists, this is how you disable them. This is how you configure them anyway. The list advisor is configured here on this configuration list and so forth for the other options. I'll just put this here because if you want to actually do this, then download these slides, the PDF of these slides from the registration page, and then you can take a look at this and it'll quickly get you to the right configuration menu. Now I want to highlight some features you really should enable if you haven't already. These are really strongly about bringing the features into Leganto that instructors value. Again, sometimes they're different than the value that Leganto brings to the library. So how are instructors using Leganto? What do they need? And first, I want to talk about the option to provide help or training materials to the instructors within Leganto. We know that you folks spend a lot of time and effort creating training materials for both instructors and students. And by the way, you can now link to that training material that you've created from within Leganto. But if you haven't created a lot of training materials yourself, we have ways to take some of the burden off of your shoulders by adding new resources directly into the product. So you may have already seen this with the guided tours and the guided videos, which walk instructors through specific tasks. You can enable those videos that walk through the main tasks. You can use our out-of-the-box videos, or you can create your own and link to them from the help menu within Leganto. We also have the guided tours that detect what page the instructor is on and then walk them through the specific steps for each process. You can enable and disable specific videos and tours so that only the features that you have enabled get the videos and the tours. Because these videos and tours and help files are context sensitive, they're based on where the instructor is at the time, it really facilitates the instructors just trying things out. Because they know if they get stuck, they can find help right when they need it. They don't have to dig through other documentation that doesn't apply or watch a really long video just to get to the one part they need to understand the page that they're looking at. If you do create your own end user help page, you can change the link that goes to the Ex Libris help system and instead goes to your help page. And you can make separate help pages for instructors and for students so that they'll see the appropriate page depending on their user status. And you can display a general message to everyone when they log into Leganto. So if you have some important information you want to share, it will appear right above the citations. And the general message can be specific to certain users, like just for instructors, telling them when their reading lists are due, or asking them to participate in a survey. But it's important to have the message up for just a short time. You probably don't want to use this for a message that's always there because eventually folks will ignore it. The next thing you probably want to enable is list analysis, if you haven't already done that. These are analytics that instructors can see about how students are engaging with the course materials. These statistics are anonymous, so the instructors can't tell which students have used which resources. You also have the option to enable a tool called Student Success Measurements. This is also usage information that instructors can see, but it's not anonymized. So that means the instructor can see which students have clicked through to view the various resources. I am definitely not going to make a recommendation either way on this one because of the privacy issues that come up. You might want to talk to your privacy officer if your institution has one of those. But some institutions are able and willing to allow this, and this also tends to be information that instructors want. And depending on how things are set up at your institution, instructors may already be able to access the information through other tools like your LMS. So in those cases where it's already fine for this specific information to be shared with the instructors, the student success measurements may just be a quicker way to get the same information. This entire session has really been about the instructor experience, but I do want to mention some Leganto features that help students, because how students use Leganto can definitely impact the instructor experience. For example, if students find it easy to use and don't struggle to access resources, then there's less work for the instructors. So first of all, when a student looks at a citation on a reading list, you can choose to have the link at the bottom say view online or check availability. If it's a check availability link, it opens up the citation view, and then the student needs to pick from a list of resources that are available. On the other hand, the view online link that you see here takes the student to the first non-hidden link and automatically opens up the resource. We recommend that you use view online. It's one less click for the students to get to the resource, and students tend to not care if there's 3 different resource providers. They just want to read it. And so the view online is generally the preferred way to set that up. And here's in red font here is the configuration to go do that. The other feature that will help students is to enable broken link reporting. So if something goes wrong with a link, then there's an obvious way for the student to communicate that to the library. And instructors also can mark a citation as broken. When they click that link to mark as broken, it creates a task in Alma for library staff to take a look at it. There are a couple of active learning tools that were recently added to Leganto that could help students and instructors. There's social reading and read and respond assignments. These features were created in response to some comments like this one from a Leganto survey I was telling you about. An instructor said it's an ongoing problem to get students to really do all the readings they're required to do. I'm sure that's a common complaint. So these features are two ways to help do that. Social reading on the left there is the option to have collaborative annotations on course materials. Students and instructors can have conversations about the material right next to the resource itself. Read and respond assignments is the ability to add a resource as an actual assignment for the students in the learning management system. So you make it a required reading. And it also gives students the ability to respond to specific questions or issues posed by the instructors. Both of these features really help with this concept of active learning, getting students more engaged with their course material. Normally, reading is something a student does by themselves, and you hope they do it, and you hope they get out of it what you want. These tools allow students to add comments, ask questions, collaborate with their peers, and encourage that interaction around their course materials. And it also allows instructors to monitor the student learning. Are the students adding comments indicating they get it or they don't get it? And like I said, those are relatively new. So if you haven't taken a look at those, please do go check them out and check out the documentation and the videos about that. Speaking of documentation and videos, that's the point we are at now. I've presented what I specifically wanted to show you folks for instructors, but there are a few more details you can read about each of these. A lot more details. There's a lot of documentation and training about this. Because we are wrapping up, if there was something that you had a question about that you didn't see, that we didn't talk about, now's your chance to add that question into the chat and the WebEx chat. Again, send it to all panelists. I'm just going to point out some resources to help you learn more. And again, you don't have to take notes on this. Just download this PDF presentation from the registration page where you registered for today's session, and these the links that are in here will work from that PDF. So there's a couple of ways to get personal assistance from other folks on the Ex Libris Clarivate staff. First, you can contact your Ex Libris Campus Engagement Manager. These folks are available to help with what we might call the social adoption of Leganto. In other words, how to talk to instructors about Leganto, how to reach new instructors, how to leverage some of the big initiatives that are happening on your campus to promote Leganto. These campus engagement managers, folks, will be able to share some resources with you for that. And if you're not sure who that is, let us know in the chat and we can look it up for you for what your institution is, and we'll get you named for you. Or if you just file a support ticket and ask for your campus engagement manager's name, contact information, then that can happen that way. You can also contact our premium services education team. They can provide suggestions for workflow optimization for your instructors. They can help you with configuring Leganto. Basically, for a fee, they can do just about any kind of customized Leganto training or assistance that you need. And there's the email address to communicate with them. Here is some of the key documentation about many of the things we've been talking about today. If you tried to click on these links right now, it wouldn't work on your WebEx screen, but download the presentation from that same registration page on the Knowledge Center where you registered for today's session, and then you can go into the slides and these links work there. There's also quite a bit of video training on specific subjects that we've been talking about, especially as it relates to instructors. And in fact, several of these videos would be great for the instructors themselves to watch to learn about features like the social reading and read and respond assignments. And that way, by seeing those, the instructors could choose to use those features on their reading lists. Before I wrap this up, I just want to check in one more time with Jesse if there's any other questions or subjects we should demonstrate.
We do have one question that's about the view online versus the check availability option. So if you have this set to view online, it doesn't open up the full view of the citation. It takes you directly to the first link. If the first link is hidden, or if the first 6 links are hidden, it will take the student to the first non-hidden link. That's the way that this works. It's a nice feature to enable because it essentially saves students an extra click for every single resource that they need to access. So that's a nice option, but that's the way that it works. If you do have some of those links hidden, it will go to whichever is the first one that's not.
Thanks. Next month, we will have the 5th session in this series about becoming a Leganto expert. In this case, we're going to go through purchasing workflows. There are some purchasing workflows that can be facilitated by Leganto. So we'll look at manual requests and automated requests. We'll take a quick look at the Rialto product and how that fits into purchasing workflows and more. That will be 5 weeks from now on Thursday, May 19th. And if you haven't already registered for that session, you can do so on that same registration page where you registered for today's session. And again, that's also the page where you can download the presentation slides if you want to review them. And today's recording will be on that page, probably sometime tomorrow for this training session if you want to see it again, or if you have a colleague at your institution that will want to see it. That's what I have for you folks today. Thank you very much for joining us. As you leave the WebEx session, your browser will automatically open up a survey. Please take a moment to fill it out and let us know what you thought. We do offer this training session a couple times a year, and we like to make it better. So anything you can mention to help us, things that worked well for you and we definitely should not get rid of, keep that. That's just as well for us. Thanks very much, folks. We'll see you in a few weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.